Hi, hello everybody. Welcome back to the free Bite-Sized Masterclass series for people who manage people in teams. This is, I think it's day 6. And actually what we are going to be talking about today is managing change and crisis. So as usual, I just wanted to let you know what we discussed so far and what we'll be discussing next. So last week we talked about how we can prepare for high performance. This week we're talking about the actual performance bit. And then next week we're going to talk about the recovery. So if on Tuesday we talked about managing our time, yesterday we talked about how we can manage our team properly, and then today we're talking about managing change. Yes, that is it, managing change. How can we manage change? Can we really manage change? Well, I think what happened so far is that we kind of did. And we are still managing change from one day to the next, right? So I think that is a great thing to see. Okay, before we actually start, I wanted to say, whenever you have a question, whenever you have a comment, please just drop them there. I am watching. I'm keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have questions and comments, please share with them, with us. Don't share with them, share with us. All right. So we said we were going to talk about how we can manage change. And we actually need to have a look at what does that mean? Are we leading or are we managing change? Because there are two different perspectives on this. So one thing is leading it, which means that we're either sponsoring or initiating change, or managing it. And when we're managing it, we're agents or we're executing the change initiatives. So this is an important distinction to make right off the bat, because it's crucial for us to know, are we leading or are we managing it? Okay. So now that we have this figured out, so think about yourself as the team manager, as the team leader. What are you doing? Or what have you been doing, considering all of the changes that have happened in such a short period of time? And then we're going to talk about crisis as well and what the difference is between change and crisis. So what have you done to either lead or manage change, or maybe both? And here's what we can say about change. So there are 4 types of change. And I think, again, looking at what has happened, this probably doesn't come really as a surprise to you. So the 4 types are mission changes, strategic changes, operational changes, and also technological changes. Now, what happens in a crisis is that crisis will bring several types, if not all of those changes, together at once. That's the thing with crisis. So crisis typically gathers all of the types of changes together in a very short period of time. And again, you can think about what happened with the whole pandemic and the whole crisis, and how it changed. It possibly might have changed your company mission, your business mission, your team's mission. Strategic changes, again, we needed to come up with different kind of strategies so that we can deal with a problem that we didn't have before. Operational changes, now these were changes maybe in the structure of your company, and we've seen that on different levels with different kinds of businesses and companies all through this crisis. And then technological changes, I don't have to really tell you about those, because pretty much what happened is we went from working in the office, most of us, to working from home almost overnight. So technological changes in the way that we communicate. So that said, let's have a look at the distinction between change transition and crisis management, and let's see what that actually means. And again, if you have any questions or any comments, I'm looking and waiting for them. Okay, keeping an eye on it. Okay, so with change, what happens is change typically is managed, and it talks about an end result, right? So with change, we're here and we're looking at something that needs to happen in the future. And we talk about realigning culture, people, resources with a shift in organizational direction, right? So we are changing directions, we're changing gears, we're moving from here to here. It also has a situational outcome. So what that means is with change will come new procedures, new offices, maybe new responsibilities, new boss, who knows. But we kind of figure out what the outcome is. We know what the outcome should be because that's how we know that change has happened. We have reached the outcome. And it's externally focused on the outcome that the change produces, right? So we look at it and we see how we can change, so that we arrive at that outcome. And then with transition is actually the process of changing, right? So if change looks at the end result, transition looks at the process of how we're going to get there. And with transition, first comes the emotional toll on people as they are adjusting from old ways to the new. And really, without transition, change doesn't work because that means that we haven't really adjusted. So right at the beginning of the transition, we need to focus on what do we need to finish, what needs to end, what do we leave behind so that we can change the old ways and the old identity and move on to the new, right? So that is typically what happens with a normal change process. It has to have a transition process. So that helps us get from point A to point Z and deal with all of the challenges and issues in the middle. But what transition does is it addresses the emotional toll, right? Because we don't necessarily like changes. And come on, some of us, and we'll talk about that in about 5 minutes from now, how people react to change. But you can already think about yourself. How do you react to change? And what is the emotional toll that it takes on you? Now, what happens with crisis is that crisis deals with disrupted and unexpected events that threaten to harm the organization, the people, the stakeholders, right? So with crisis, we get change accelerated. So the difference between a normal change and change in a crisis is speed. With crisis, you need to be quick, which reminds me of that movie title, The Quick or the Dead. It's basically, if you think about what happened so far, it's basically pretty much true. So what also happens with the crisis, the change is already there, or we can see change coming onto us without us being able to avoid that kind of change. And typically the outcome is negative, or at least unclear in the beginning, right? And think about, again, you all have the crisis in mind, the pandemic, the lockdown, and everything that happened, right? At the beginning, like a lot of people were thinking, when are we going to go back to the way things were? I want things to get back to normal. Because why? We couldn't see any positive outcome of what had just happened. So whatever the new is, with the crisis initially, it's negative, or if it's the best we can make of it is if it's unclear, because it's an event that threatens us. It's life and death situation. And we need to do a lot of strategic thinking in a crisis so that we can actually think about long-term positive outcomes. That's the difference. With change, we might see some positive outcomes right there. With crisis, initially, no, we see them. And then we look at the whole change and transition process, and we know that there are these typical three stages: the beginning, the middle, and the arrival. So the end of change, which is the arrival, the point of change. That's when we know that change has happened, right? So the real change isn't about managing change itself. It's about managing transitions from the old to the new. This is why a crisis makes things more difficult, because if we think about the change as the actual arrival and transitions as our way of getting there, crisis, think about it, accelerates arrival before it even completes transitions. So with crisis, you have change that's already happened. We're already on point 3, and we haven't even dealt with point 1 and 2. That's what makes crisis so hard to manage, because not only it accelerates not only it has the outcome, the arrival there, but also it hasn't been able to address that transition, that middle piece, that essential beginning piece where people are so emotional. It hasn't dealt with the emotional, which is huge, and we haven't been able to deal with it yet. And change is already there. So looking at this, the difference in managing change and managing crisis is that change is managed usually before the event, right? And yes, the future is still uncertain because we have no 100% guarantee of what's going to happen and what it's going to look like. Where maybe people are not sure what to do, maybe they're looking for guidance, but we do have time to plan, to strategize, to implement, to readjust, to tweak things where we see that they don't work, and to evaluate the results. We also have time to train people, to coach people, to help them adapt and be resilient to change, and to address their concerns, to address challenges, to address that emotional bit of what do we need to leave behind so that we can move forward. And we're looking with change, with normal process change, we look for reassurance that, hey, you know what, where we're going is going to be better than where we've been. And yes, there needs to be a lot of communication in place with that, but it is more manageable and we have more control over it. Now with crisis, it's basically managing change after it has happened. So management after the event. And decisions must be made fast. That's it. That's the distinction. Speed. Again, everything is accelerated. And really, we have no reassurance about the outcome. Why? Because we have no idea. Because it's change happening over and over and over again. And plus, we already have things changed right there who have affected us already. And there are 6 stages within every crisis. And I think, again, think about the crisis, you will know. And you will see them now, and they do make a lot of sense, right? You have the warning signs, and that's where companies and businesses start thinking, okay, you know what do I do? What do we do if this crisis hits us? What do we do? What's the plan? What can we do? What can we do to prepare? Or some businesses who just freeze. and say, okay, maybe this won't affect us. Maybe it's too far away and it doesn't affect me. And then risk assessment, right? What does it bring? What does it mean? What changes might the crisis bring to us? Because again, these are threats. So we're doing some threat assessment here, and how does that affect us, short term, mid-term, and long term? And then how do we respond to that? How do we manage it? So how do we manage that transition, which needs to be managed after the threat has hit us already? And then the resolution, what do we do? What do we keep in place? What do we still need to change? And what do we do to recover after the crisis, right? So that makes, I think it makes a lot of sense to you, but I wanted to make sure that we have this distinction, because I've heard a lot of comments that, well, with this, we're managing change and we're managing crisis. Anyone who managed change before can manage a crisis. Not necessarily, because crisis takes an emotional toll that we haven't been able to address. Not just people weren't prepared. They weren't prepared because they didn't see it coming, but they also weren't prepared to give up everything that they were used to, or used to have, ways of working, communication. Think about it. Working from home, it basically happened overnight. So change was already here. And then we had to find a way to help everybody transition. So people were already working from home because they couldn't go to the office anymore. And then we figured out the whole process of how we can make this work from home sustainable long term. Yeah, okay, in a crisis we have to do it, we do it anyway, and in any way that we can. And then what do we do to make sure that's actually sustainable, that we're helping our team work from home effectively and still be productive and keep their mental health in place and keep communication going? All of that we had to deal with after it was already there. Okay, so I want to check again. Comments, questions, put them here. Otherwise, we're moving on to 5 ways in which people react to change. And I'm going to take this off so we can see. Okay. And I think you might have seen this before, but if you haven't, it's from Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation model. And typically, he discovered 5 ways in which people react to change. And initially, you have 2.5% in an organization. It doesn't matter. It can be a large organization, a small business, a startup, whatever it is, and wherever you operate. You have the innovators, and innovators typically are game changers. And by the way, we talked about that yesterday in how you can manage your team. So if you haven't been here yesterday, just click on the link in the description of the video, and then you will be getting all of the replays and handouts of all of the sessions that we've had so far. So, and we talked about game changers, so people who transform the future and think about new ways of doing things. These are them. And they embrace new things and initiatives. And they will either be the first in line or the first seeking out further information. Then you have early adopters, and they are typically people who are compliant with managers' requests, either because they feel obligated to do it, or they might be playmakers in an organization. So they're looking at harmonizing relationships. Again, we talked about that in yesterday's session. So early adopters will make about 13.5% of your team or organization. And then you have early majority, which means that these people tend to really wait and see what happens, because they will want to be involved if they see that the new is adding value. right? They have to have some information about how the new is adding value. And then the late majority, which is again 34%, the next 34%, these are the people who are more skeptical, and they are the ones who trust the data, and they're not convinced by anything that's hype or popular. They need the tried and tested. So typically, these will be the implementers. If we again talk about yesterday's session and how people make an impact in a team. So they will need to see the tried and tested, and they will need to see that, hey, you know what, this is the way to go. So they do become strong advocates and valuable allies when that happens, when they have clear test results. And you do want to bring them on, because these are the people who are going to be able to help you prove the benefits of the change after it's been tested already. So they will typically have a following of people who admire their analytical skills and who value their conclusions. And if you win over a skeptic, usually that means that you will also win over their followers. And then, last but not least by any means, laggards or cave people. And now cave stands for citizens against virtually everything. So they're more than skeptical, right? They are the most risk averse group because they don't want to join and they don't care about the outcomes. Why? Because usually they've experienced programs that were implemented that either didn't add value or completely failed and did more harm, right? So they are the ones who experienced failure firsthand, and they only have that experience. They have the super bad experience of change, and you absolutely need to make them part of the change considerations, right? And typically what you want to do is have them work with the skeptics, with the late majority, because the skeptics are the ones who can actually come with valuable concrete data to help the laggards adopt change as well. Late, but still adopt change and go with it and be part of it rather than keep missing the good old times. So I'm gonna just pause here because I have this exercise for you, and then you can absolutely think about your team and think about what happens. I don't know why I made this small. Okay, in your team or in your organization, your business, try to identify the individuals that would be innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, and also think about who might be some opinion leaders in the early adopters group. That's important because you need your ambassadors, your change ambassadors, and moving from one stage to the next, they will help you implement the change and they will help everybody adopt the change as well. And again, we're at that stage, and that's what happened again after the crisis. So the result of the crisis, we're here. What do we do to change? What's the process? How do we go about it? And yes, absolutely, I'm sure you've already identified some of these categories, and now you're probably thinking how you can bring the late majority, and the laggards in. Okay, Steffi, thank you so much for joining today, and thank you for your comment. Yeah, I'm glad that this is helpful information to you on how we react to change. I know, right? It's as people, we typically don't like change. I think it's so important to know how we react to it, because as we've seen, there's so few of us that actually are there to adopt change right from the beginning. Otherwise, most of us, we don't like change. All right, so let's move on and let's see how can we thrive through change and crisis. And again, with working with organizations and teams and small businesses, I've helped them help their teams thrive through change. Now, you will know your context and your organization, your team better. These are tips that you can use to help you as a team leader, as a team manager, thrive through change, through this kind of change after the crisis, and also help your team go through it. And what we can also assume is that as we move forward, we will move from one change to the next. So, and we know that change is the only constant that we have, but combined with the sense of crisis and this particular kind of crisis, which is health related as well, that comes on top of the emotional toll that any crisis would take over. It's extra because it's super personal and it's super important. So, number one thing, expect ambiguity, because and we've all seen that, right? Nobody really has all of the answers, and not in the beginning and not even right now. We're just finding the answers as we go. So there might be no clear strategy in the beginning to, effectively announce and implement change. So expect ambiguity, and you can expect ambiguity even moving forward. So yeah, you know what, the crisis hasn't stopped yet. The change hasn't stopped. We have another change coming. So with any kind of change that we go through, I think it's important to align our expectations and really expect ambiguity. Then build emotional strength. Again, when we talk about crisis, especially, we talk about heightened emotional tolls. With any change, we get that because we've said that with transition addresses this kind of emotional toll that any kind of change takes on people. With crisis, that's only augmented. So, a question for you as a team leader, as a business leader, team manager: how have employees have been groomed to deal with continuous change as a way of life? Because there's one thing to adapt quickly to the crisis because you have to, and then there's the separate thing of actually having to cope with it, having the coping mechanisms in place to help you deal with that long term. Because crisis comes and goes, but with this particular kind of crisis, it seems to be continuous, and it just develops a continuous type of change. So that's a question. Creating opportunities, because you know what, we all know that change offers both uncertainty and opportunity, right? So how can you create opportunities as the business leader, as the team leader, for growth, for productivity, for personal transformation? Look at what some opportunities can be, what opportunities you have created, and try to identify, get your team on board to identify more opportunities for you as a team, as an organization, as individuals, right? And that brings us to point number 4, which is empowering. What levels of creativity, of decision making, problem solving exist for your team to engage their talents and to contribute at their best? Really, this is, and we talked about it yesterday as well. You, as the team leader, as a team manager, you are the ones who create the environment where people feel they can contribute. If they cannot feel they can contribute, you don't have collaboration, you don't have trust, you don't have a real sense of team. It's just a group of people working together. Which brings us to how we can involve people in the process. So now it depends. Are you a large organization? Are you a large team? Are you a small business? Are you a startup? If you have a small team, you're it. You don't necessarily need to run surveys or polls or make focus groups, because that's it. Your focus group is basically your team. And definitely ask for opinions of how your team would make the changes, how your team members would make changes, or talk to other team leaders, to other organization leaders, other business leaders. How do they address those changes? Because again, nobody holds the recipe, especially in a crisis. And what you can do is create transition management teams. Again, if you're a small team, you're the transition management team, absolutely. If you're in a larger organization, you can create smaller transition management teams. Again, you don't have to do it alone. Leaders, team managers, business leaders, you don't have to be alone. It doesn't work anymore. It's about team leadership, team management. That's what it means to allow team members, individual team members, to take the lead depending on circumstances and their level of expertise and experience. What you can also do is select a team leader. That's going to be important for you, again, as team leaders and managers. Putting someone in charge who has the respect of other people on the team, but you definitely need to delegate. So see what is it that you can delegate to somebody who can be a team leader for the change. Also, make sure that you're providing training, and I absolutely recommend a combination of training and group coaching. That's what I've done with some of the clients that I've been working with during this time with their teams, because training can be in the new culture, in the new mission, values, skills, behaviors, processes, right? Especially now, because hey, we've had change, but then we have to figure out everything else that needs to bring us to a different kind of outcome, right? Not the negative one, but a positive one. So what do we need to know? But then only training won't be enough, because the difference, there's a full journey from finding out what we need to know to actually being able to implement it and apply it and see how it works in practice. And what group coaching will do is bring a forum of discussion and also the practical approach. So how do we apply? How do we actually get that piece of training, the knowledge, and how do we make it and turn it into an experience, into something practical that we can actually use? So what initiatives are in place for your for continuous learning in your team, in your organization? Also, it it helps to bring an expert from the outside, especially in a crisis, because what they can do is offer more objectivity, and they might also give you a fresh perspective. And if they are also handling the coaching and some training, they can also ask you some of the questions that probably you wouldn't be asking, because you don't even think about them, because you're too much in the midst of it all. And then absolutely communicate progress. And you have all of the communication systems in place: emails, newsletters, group chats, forums. Definitely don't forget to celebrate incremental changes, because, hey, we are moving from one moment to the next, and we need to know how we're doing. It's not that I arrived from point A to point Z in just a second. No, I need to be able to understand how we got there and what went well. And take the time to evaluate and reward work. It's, again, monitoring changes, giving and receiving feedback. That's essential, especially when we deal with change and especially when we deal with crisis. And just remember that recognizing the achievements goes a long way. But not just that, also the sacrifices that people have made, especially in a crisis, because again, in a crisis, you do want to address the emotional toll, the emotional experience that people have, and it's pretty much negative. So talk about that. Don't cover it up. talk about it, address it, and recognize it. That is what makes people feel heard and understood and then appreciated. Okay. Again, we could be talking about this for longer, but definitely make sure you click on the link in the description to get the replay of today's session, the session handout. I also included a meeting link for you if you want to talk about changes in teams that you're leading. I'm happy to chat with you about that and maybe come up with some strategies and solutions for you. And I'm also sharing some useful links. So click the link in the description and get everything. And this is what we're doing in the Lead for Legacy League. This is why this is here and it's created and it works. It's the online group program for management and leadership development. And we do have you get the technical knowledge for management and leadership skills that you can use with your team, in your business, in your organization. You have 250 plus award-winning online courses available in leadership and sales and customer service, a lot on change management and crisis management. And we also do regular group coaching and Q&As and discussions, because again, what we're looking at is helping team leaders, managers, business leaders really be hands-on on how they manage the team. I've seen a lot of people who were promoted to management positions who weren't trained on how they can manage a team, on how they can manage people. So they weren't like, and talking about managing change wasn't managed properly, because with change there needs to be a certain level of training so that people are prepared to move through change properly. This is what the Lead for Legacy does, and it's global. So you're getting support, brainstorming, and networking with peers from all over the world. If you want to find out more about that, book a meeting in the link that comes with the resources, and I'm so happy to talk to you about it, or just message me and we can chat. And then next week, we are going to talk about self-care strategies for high performance. Again, we are talking about why it's important for whenever we talk about high performance to talk about the full cycle of high performance, which means preparation, performance, and recovery. So next week, we're going to the recovering stage, which is crucial in us being able to perform at high levels long term. Okay. Steffi says, I think the more leadership is transparent and shares changes happening, the more people can feel more safe and secure instead of having to guess at what is happening. Absolutely. Transparency, communication throughout the full change process. So the full transition, that's what helps people. Don't cover things up. Again, talk to them, let them know, celebrate successes, address challenges, address sacrifices, be transparent on what works and what doesn't work. And that means that we can also move forward and that we're flexible enough to be able to tweak what doesn't work. So that is crucial. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your comment. Transparency is absolutely necessary, especially when we deal with change in a crisis. Okay, that being said, thank you so much for being here with me today, and see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Bye for now.